We all start somewhere, and I want to help you out if you're new to IDPA or USPSA. In this video, I go over 5 things you need to know as a new shooter to this sport. If you'd seen any of my previous videos, you'll know I started about October of 2020, and as of this filming, I'm about 2.5 years and 250 matches into this. And over the years, I've actually made some observations, and I wanted to share some additional things if you're new to IDPA or USPSA. And the reason for that is because when I remember starting out, there wasn't a plethora of information out there for the newbie. And so I want to share 5 quick things that you need to think about when you are coming into this sport. Alrighty, so number 1, the first thing I want to go over is the importance of dry fire. Now, dry fire is critical because when you're new, you're really thinking about a lot of things going through your mind. And one thing that kind of helps it is if you get some of the basic mechanical functions of movement out of the way. That can include anything from a draw, a reload, or most importantly, muzzle discipline, because we have rules that stipulate that you have to have your muzzle within a certain range, typically within the 180 range. Now, the rules are stringent depending on club and the match you shoot, so do check on those. But I want to kind of go over very quickly the muzzle discipline portion of this, because I think that's the one thing I see get DQ'd the most, because people just aren't aware of where this is pointing. Now, I actually have a toy right here, and this is actually really cool because it's actually the footprint of a 1911. It racks, as you see, and it actually has a pretty nice trigger pull. This is actually a pretty cool tool if you want to keep it at home as a dry fire tool. I know I use it for fun and I share it with my kids, but I find that practicing muzzle discipline with this is good, especially when you're new. And so what you want to end up dry firing is being in the habit of making sure this muzzle stays down range. And what that looks like is this. If you go left, it should look like this. If you go right, it should look like this. Even if you go backwards, you'll find that I end up pushing out, or obviously going forward, you go in. But what you want to dry fire at home is making sure that this muzzle is always pointing down range. And so again, if you're at home doing a dry fire, make sure you're pointed in a safe place and really think about what's on the other side of what you could be dry firing against. If you're out there practicing, the one thing you end up doing is, this is what's cool about this toy, is it ends up coming with a mag, okay? As you see, I can practice it. That's a good way to practice reloads at home. Now, the big thing is when you're going left to right or right to left. If you're a righty, going left to right is pretty simple because the muzzle naturally points down range and you just push it right in there. Now, this is tricky, and this applies for lefties too if you're going the opposite way. Here's the thing. Now that you've taught yourself to keep your muzzle down range, it naturally wants to point this way if you pull it up. A lot of people, what they end up doing as they're moving right to left is they end up coming and pushing it in this way and going in this way. Now, that is not a natural feeling. And a lot of times I see new shooters get DQ'd if you're a righty going right to left, because what ends up happening is this. They naturally just want to go this way and then point it this way, and the gun's already broken the 180 and when they're trying to do their reload. So this is why it's critical to practice dry firing when you can, when you are new. Now that you've kind of got yourself sorted out, this is a huge one, and this is one I see get missed by even the most experienced shooters, and that is number 2, which is hydrate. The things you want to think about is that most of the time the environments are hot, and what you're going to find is when you're resetting stages or you're shooting stages, you're going to burn through quite a bit of hydration. And so your body's going to obviously sweat that out, and you need to make sure you replace that, not only for your natural health, but for your match clarity as well. What I never want to see is someone finding out the hard way that they're dehydrated when they're either dizzy or they're losing their mental clarity. So I can't express enough, make sure you drink a lot of water. All right, so now that you've got dry fire under control and you're hydrated, number 3 is be the best squad mate. This is one new shooters usually often miss, and I'll explain why it's important. Because not only is this a volunteer sport in which we require each other's help to reset, score, and whatever, it is actually critical for your development. Usually new shooters are just kind of unsure of the lay of the land, and what I find, and I try to teach it with new shooters, is that get in the habit of resetting is also another way of getting to walk stages. Now, I'm not necessarily saying intentionally walk the stage, but you end up kind of walking through shooting positions to kind of get a second view of spots after your initial walkthrough. The more repetitions as a new shooter you can get to seeing things, the quicker you will improve. The other thing too is hopping on the scoring tablet. Now the scoring tablet as a new shooter can seem intimidating, but the cool thing about our sport is everybody is more than happy to walk you through it and make you better through it. Now this is critical too, because as you're learning this, you learn not only how scoring works, but you also start to learn about different rules, faults, procedurals. Those things add up when you're new, because you'll end up finding out that you might end up violating quite a few. But this is a good way to understand the actual mechanics of how the sport works. A lot of new shooters miss this mark, a lot of times because it can be based on how a person is socially speaking. I made it a point to get to know everybody at my range, my squad mates, everybody, because what I found out when I started this was factory ammo is about 50-60 cents a round, and that was not something I wanted to spend long term. And so as I made more friends and made contacts, I found that I could get reloads with people that had large stockpiles, which obviously helped reduce my cost of shooting significantly. Being the best squad mate is a huge win because it makes you a better shooter, generally speaking. It helps you understand all the rules, and of course, the more friends you make, the more resources you end up having. Now I'm gonna hop into our 4th point, but before I do, if you like this video, please give me a like button, as that helps me a lot. And I ask that you subscribe as well, because I'll have plenty of reviews coming out, and I'll be developing additional content to not only share my journey, but make you a better shooter. So you're gonna wanna subscribe. Now this leads to the 4th thing of advice I have for you, and that's called you do you. What I see oftentimes is that there is a lot of different ways and approaches on how to actually play the sport, shoot, whatever you want to call it. The challenge with that is a lot of times it's generalized, and it doesn't really consider you as the shooter, because the other things you got to consider is how fast you learn, how comfortable you're with shooting, and believe it or not, athleticism. Someone who's naturally more athletic is not going to be really that slowed down with the actual movement of entries and exits into position, and so they may be actually needing to work more on their fundamentals of shooting. And a lot of times what I end up seeing is well-intended people giving advice to someone that the advice isn't really relevant for them. And so part of the fun thing I've found in this sport is that you have to understand what your deficiencies are, and it's fairly obvious too. If you know you're suffering in accuracy, you know you need to go to a range and practice your fundamentals. Or if you know you're slow moving around, you start to break down things that you can improve on within your movement to actually get a lower time. But the thing is, everybody learns at a different rate. And a lot of times people would give me advice that summarized is, well, you just got to move quicker and smoother. I have pretty severe knee issues, and perhaps maybe that sounds good to someone that doesn't have bad knee issues, but how does it work for me? And so what I ended up having to do was actually work on my leg strength, my core strength, and lose quite a bit of weight in order to improve my movement. That's why I say you've got to do you, because you have to find out what works for you. Now, the final topic is one I see new shooters struggle with the most, and also kind of leads to them burning out, and that's you got to compete with yourself. I was guilty of this in the beginning because I came from a motorsport background as well as I played football in college and high school. I was always in a situation where I was against my direct competition. And that's not the case with Action Pistol, because what you're really trying to do is beat people by being the most efficient and accurate shooter when you are running. And what I see oftentimes is that I'll see shooters start to chase other shooters, which from a learning perspective could be a good thing as long as you're actually learning something. But what I see oftentimes is they'll start to compare themselves to another shooter that could be at a different level, and before you know it, they don't even have the headspace to complete the rest of the stages and actually shoot well. One thing I focused on when I was stuck in this is I had to learn to beat myself. And what that meant was focusing on metrics that actually equated to better results. Because if you beat yourself, which means you get over yourself mentally and you improve your mechanics and your shooting game, you have no choice but to show up in the results. So things I end up focusing on, and it depends whether it's on either IDPA or USPSA, because I actually have two very different approaches. Now for IDPA, I focus on reducing my raw time, and I may benchmark that against a better shooter. Now, I know I talked about not comparing yourself, but that's what I do to benchmark, because I start to ask the questions of how is that guy or gal moving through a stage? What are they doing? Are they getting their gun up early? Are they just so much faster in their mechanics? Are their transitions quick? All those things start to add up and you end up becoming quicker at that. Now simultaneously, what I will also focus on, because accuracy is a massive component of IDPA, is actually how my hits are. Right now I'm actually focused on getting about an average of 1.5 points down per stage, and so if you calculate that over a 6-stage match, I'm looking to get 9 points down or better while maintaining a solid raw time. If I focus on those things, I end up looking at my scores and comparing to others after the match to see that, hey, what I'm doing is actually working. Now, I want to touch briefly on USPSA, because that's a slightly different approach, because there's a better balance in the scoring system with hit factor scoring, which rewards both accuracy and speed. And so when I think about that, I'm looking to get it optimized on a level about anywhere from 1 second to 2 seconds, with a stage winner in a similar or like division. Accuracy is a slightly different approach. You can afford to be off the alpha zone where it's a critical component in IDPA. What I'm looking to shoot is about 90% of points currently. I hover somewhere between 88 and 92% on average, but I've learned if I get a little bit higher on the shooting percentage, I may actually be a little slower. So I'm constantly pushing those metrics around to maximize the actual points to my benefit. You're dry firing, you're hydrating, you're a great squad mate, and you're good at being you, you'll find that you end up being a much smarter shooter overall. And so I want to wrap this up, guys, by saying this. When you are new, think about these 5 tips. Additionally, as one bonus tip, remember, be the safest one out there and have the most fun. And until then, we will see you at the range.